My name is Tasha Wilson. I'm 34. And never in my wildest dreams did I imagine myself sitting in divorce court, watching my husband of 7 years sign those papers with a smug, self-satisfied grin. James thinks he's walking away with half of my so-called meager assets, completely oblivious to the storm about to hit. What he doesn't know is that I've been quietly building a financial empire for years, while he spent that same time dismissing me at every turn. I can see him now, smiling as if he's won some prize. But that smile won't last. The moment the judge reads out my true net worth, his arrogance will shatter, and he'll finally understand just what he has lost. I grew up in a modest middle-class neighborhood in Milwaukee, raised by parents who worked tirelessly to provide for us. My father was a high school math teacher. My mother owned a small downtown bakery. From them, I learned the value of perseverance, responsibility, and living within your means. Summers at the bakery weren't just about baking the perfect chocolate chip cookie. I learned about profit margins, inventory, and how to build lasting customer relationships, lessons I didn't realize then would prove invaluable later. I was always ambitious. In high school, I overloaded my schedule with extra classes and part-time jobs, saving every dollar for college. When I was accepted to the University of Wisconsin with a partial scholarship, my parents were over the moon. I majored in business with a focus on marketing, graduating with honors despite working 20 hours a week just to keep my student loans under control. At 24, I landed my first real marketing position at a mid-sized tech company in Boston. It wasn't just a job, it was a launchpad, with a decent salary and incredible growth potential. Moving to Boston was both terrifying and exhilarating. I knew no one. My savings were nearly gone after relocation costs, and I was starting with nothing but grit. My tiny studio in a rough neighborhood was hardly glamorous, but it became the base camp for my ambition. I threw myself into work, determined to prove I belonged. 2 years later, at a charity fundraiser my company sponsored, fate introduced me to James Anderson. He was 32, tall, conventionally attractive, radiating the kind of confidence that turned heads the moment he walked into a room. As the marketing director for a prestigious financial services firm, he seemed to know everyone there. When we were introduced, he actually leaned in, listening intently as I shared ideas about digital marketing strategies for small businesses. James came from a world completely unlike mine: private schools, an Ivy League education, and parents who paid his way through life. He had privilege written into his story. Mine was carved from long nights, side hustles, and relentless ambition. He had connections everywhere and slipped through Boston's high society as though he had been born to it. Yet that night, instead of chasing the spotlight, he stayed by my side for hours, speaking with rare sincerity about our shared dreams of entrepreneurship. He confessed his desire to one day start his own marketing agency, while I opened up about my vision of building an online consultancy to empower small businesses in the digital world. Our romance unfolded like a whirlwind. James swept me into a life I had never known: lavish dinners at restaurants I could never have afforded, invitations into his glittering circle of friends, glimpses of Boston's elite through his eyes. Just 3 weeks after we met, he surprised me with tickets to the symphony, remembering how I had once mentioned my love for classical music. A month later, he took me sailing on his friend Patrick's yacht, the city skyline shimmering behind us. For my birthday, he arranged a private cooking class with a renowned local chef, an experience so thoughtful it left me speechless. Everyone adored James. My friends couldn't stop praising his generosity and charm. When my parents visited from Milwaukee, he won them over instantly with his genuine curiosity about their lives and warm stories that painted me as the most extraordinary woman. Even Kate, my skeptical college roommate who flew in from Chicago, softened. After meeting him, she pulled me aside and whispered, He looks at you like you are his everything. 5 months after our first encounter, James proposed during a weekend getaway in Nantucket. He had rented a picturesque cottage overlooking the ocean, arranged for a private chef to prepare dinner, and then revealed a diamond ring. Stunning, extravagant, and exactly my style. I hesitated at first. 5 months felt like too soon. But James was insistent, his hands wrapped around mine, eyes locked on me with conviction. "When you know, he said softly. "I've dated enough to recognize when something is real. We are perfect together, Tasha. Why wait when we could start building our life now?" Swept up in his certainty and the intoxicating romance, I said yes. We set the date for 6 months later, just enough time to craft a beautiful wedding without being overwhelmed. Our wedding was elegant yet intimate, held in a historic Boston venue with 100 guests. I wore a simple but graceful gown, while James stood tall and striking in his tailored suit. We read our own vows, swearing to nurture each other's dreams and to always remain honest. Promises that, in hindsight, would turn into cruel ironies. For our honeymoon, we escaped to the Caribbean, 2 blissful weeks of turquoise waters, luxurious resorts, and candlelit evenings. James spoiled me with sunset cruises and couples massages, and together we dreamed aloud about the future, where we would settle, how many children we might raise, and the ways we would champion each other's ambitions. At the time, it all felt like perfect harmony. When we returned from our honeymoon, we moved into a beautiful townhouse in one of Boston's upscale neighborhoods. The down payment came largely from James's savings, a fact he would remind me of again and again in the years to come. I contributed what I could, which was far less, but we framed it as an investment in our shared future. The townhouse was conveniently close to James's office, though it added 45 minutes to my daily commute. At the time, I didn't mind. I was simply thrilled to begin our married life in such a lovely home. A few months after the wedding, I decided to take a leap I had been quietly preparing for. Launching my own online marketing consultancy. I had been building my skills, reputation, and network for years, and with James's steady income as a safety net, it felt like the perfect moment. James was enthusiastic at first. He helped me brainstorm names and even reviewed my business plan. We ultimately chose Digital Elevate, a name he declared sounded polished, professional, and unforgettable. We agreed to keep separate bank accounts while also maintaining a joint account for household expenses. Each of us would contribute based on our earnings. Since James made far more than I did at the start, he covered about 70%, while I contributed 30%. At the time, it felt fair. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs I brushed aside. James often made major decisions without asking my opinion, whether it was the car we drove or where we spent the holidays. At dinner parties, he would cut me off mid-sentence, clarifying what I had meant, as though my own words weren't precise enough. His encouragement of my business was never without caveats. Every compliment came with subtle corrections, his suggestions carefully framed to make him the expert. Even though his career was in corporate marketing, not entrepreneurship. I rationalized it all. He was stressed at work. He had been raised differently. He was only trying to help. He was more experienced in high society. I found excuses because everything else seemed so picture perfect. We had a beautiful home. We traveled often. Most of the time, he was affectionate and attentive. I convinced myself we were building something special, never once imagining how fragile it truly was. 6 months after launching Digital Elevate, I landed my first major client, a fast-growing tech company desperate for a complete overhaul of its digital marketing strategy. It was the breakthrough I had been waiting for. The contract was worth more than I had earned in 3 months at my previous job. I still remember racing home that evening, buzzing with excitement, eager to share the news with James. I had gone all out, cooked his favorite dinner, and splurged on a bottle of champagne so we could celebrate. "That is great, honey," he said when I told him, his eyes never once leaving the glow of his phone. "Pretty impressive for your little side business. Just make sure it doesn't interfere with running the house." That was the first time his words truly stung, but it would not be the last. As Digital Elevate grew, so did James's subtle undermining. When I hired my first employee, he smirked and called it cute. When I signed 3 new clients in a single month, he questioned whether I was sure I could handle it. And when I mentioned needing office space because working from home had become impractical, he warned me not to get ahead of myself. My real breakthrough came when I landed a contract with NextGen Tech, a company fresh from securing major venture capital funding. Their CEO, Natalie Reynolds, had personally sought me out after seeing the results I delivered for one of their smaller competitors. The project would more than double my company's revenue and cement Digital Elevate as a serious contender in Boston's marketing world. That night, glowing with pride, I shared the news with James. His response? "Lucky break. Their regular agency must have been booked." After that, I stopped sharing my achievements with him. It was easier than subjecting myself to the quiet dismissals, the sly digs that always made my victories feel smaller. Instead, I poured my energy into Digital Elevate. I worked long hours, often slipping out before James woke and returning after he was already in bed. He rarely asked about my day, seeming perfectly satisfied with my vague, tired replies that work was busy. Meanwhile, James was busy constructing a social life that had little room for me. He attended networking events and industry parties late into the night, often not returning until early morning. On the rare occasions he invited me, I stood alone on the edges while he worked the room, dazzling everyone with his charisma. "This is my wife, Tasha," he would say dismissively. "She does some online marketing stuff." Each time, the words cut deeper, but I learned to hide the hurt. With every success, I grew more deliberate, more strategic about my finances. I began consulting with Melissa Andrews, a financial advisor Natalie had recommended, who helped me channel my growing profits into smart investments. Together, we built a portfolio that blended stocks with carefully chosen real estate. I purchased 2 modest apartment buildings in Boston neighborhoods on the brink of gentrification, snapping them up at below-market prices just before renovations transformed their value. Within 2 years, both properties had nearly doubled in worth. As my wealth grew, I guarded it closely, not only from James, but from everyone. I kept my life deliberately understated. I continued driving the same mid-range sedan I had owned before our marriage. My wardrobe was professional but never ostentatious. Nearly every dollar I earned went back into Digital Elevate or into my quiet, steadily compounding investments. The one indulgence I allowed myself was a modest office in a downtown professional building, which I justified to James as a necessary expense to present credibility to clients. James, however, had no such restraint. He replaced his luxury car every 2 years, each one sleeker and flashier than the last. His closet filled with designer suits and watches that cost more than my first year of college tuition. He insisted on dining at the most exclusive restaurants and securing memberships at elite clubs. More than once, he would smirk and remark, "It's good that one of us makes enough to maintain our lifestyle." He assumed my business was barely scraping by, and I let him. Meanwhile, the emotional distance between us widened in lockstep with my secret financial independence. Our conversations shrank to perfunctory exchanges about bills, schedules, and social obligations. Dinner became a ritual of silence, James glued to his emails while I mentally reviewed client strategies. We no longer shared dreams or plans, and when James did talk about the future, it was always cast in terms of himself. What he wanted, what he needed, where he saw himself in 5 years. All the while, my business flourished. I upgraded to a larger office, brought on 6 full-time employees, and built a network of specialized contractors. Digital Elevate earned a reputation for delivering innovative, measurable campaigns that drew in clients who might otherwise have gone straight to the city's largest agencies. But as my independence grew, so did James's resentment. James's criticisms grew sharper as my business thrived. He would make sly remarks about my obsession with work, conveniently ignoring his own 60-hour weeks. He questioned why I needed to attend industry conferences or client dinners without him, as if my success somehow threatened him. He complained the house wasn't as immaculate as before, though he never once offered to help. If you cannot handle both your business and your responsibilities at home, maybe you should reconsider your priorities, he snapped during one particularly heated argument. Meanwhile, his own schedule grew increasingly suspicious. Late-night meetings became routine, and when he finally stumbled in, the expensive perfume clinging to his clothes was most definitely not mine. Weekend business trips multiplied, and his phone and laptop seemed to have become extensions of his own body, never out of reach, always guarded. I was afraid to question him. Every confrontation turned into another opportunity for James to blame my business for our unraveling marriage. So I stayed silent, burying myself in work instead. My company became my refuge, the one place where I was respected, valued, and in control. I expanded Digital Elevate into new services, social media management, content creation, and brought on a brilliant creative director, Thomas Baker, whose vision elevated our campaigns to award-winning levels. The contrast between my two worlds was impossible to ignore. At work, I was decisive, confident, and successful, making choices that shaped the futures of employees and clients alike. At home, I shrank into myself, second-guessing every word to avoid James's sharp criticisms and calculated coldness. Money became another battlefield. James insisted on lavish vacations and costly home renovations, always assuming I would contribute equally, despite his firm belief that my company was barely scraping by. When I suggested more modest options, not out of necessity but to conceal my financial independence, he sneered. "If you cannot keep up, just say so," he would snap, sometimes in front of contractors or travel agents, leaving me humiliated. To keep the peace, I caved. I wrote checks from my personal accounts, plural, though he never knew it. I let him believe I was straining to match his contributions, feeding his delusion that I was financially dependent on him. The emotional toll was staggering. The stress began to consume me. I lost weight without trying. Sleep slipped through my fingers, and every time my phone rang, I startled, half expecting James on the other end, ready with another criticism about something I had done wrong. Yet through it all, I guarded my secret. My true financial situation remained mine alone. Some instinct told me that information had to be protected. I had no idea just how right that instinct would prove to be. It was a Tuesday evening in November when I found the receipt. I hadn't been snooping, though James would later accuse me of exactly that. I was simply pulling the usual dry cleaning tickets from his jacket pockets before sending his suits out. That's when I saw it, a small slip of paper from Bartlett Jewelers, a pair of diamond earrings, $4,300. The purchase was dated only 3 days earlier. My birthday had passed months ago. Our anniversary was still 4 months away. I tried to rationalize, to tell myself it was a surprise for me. But James had never been one to give gifts without a reason. He was always so pragmatic, so calculated about such things. The knot in my stomach tightened as I began digging deeper. I combed through months of credit card statements, and what I found confirmed the gnawing suspicion I had been trying to ignore. Charges for Boston hotels on nights James had claimed he was working late. Restaurant bills from places we had never visited together, the totals always suggesting 2 people. Recurring payments at a high-end lingerie store I had never set foot in. The final confirmation came almost by accident. One evening, James left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while he showered. I had never invaded his privacy before. I believed in boundaries, just as I expected mine to be respected. But the evidence had piled too high to ignore. I needed the truth. What I found broke whatever remained of my denial. The text messages were explicit, shameless, and endless. Conversations with at least 3 different women spanning the past year. There were hotel arrangements, whispers of stolen weekends, cruel complaints about his nagging wife, and promises of a glittering future together once he figured things out. I sat at the kitchen island, his phone in my hand, scrolling for nearly an hour. Oddly, I felt calm, like I was analyzing a particularly complicated client case, rather than watching my marriage collapse in real time. Methodically, I took screenshots of everything, forwarding them to my personal email. When I was finished, I set the phone back exactly where he had left it, untouched, as if nothing had happened. That evening, after dinner, I confronted him in the living room. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say, determined to keep my tone steady and factual. I know about the affairs, James. I've seen the texts, the hotel charges, the jewelry receipts. I know there have been at least 3 women in the past year. For a moment, he just stared at me, his face unreadable. Then his expression hardened, shifting from shock to something colder. Contempt. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try to explain. Instead, he laughed. Actually laughed, as though my heartbreak were some kind of joke. Well, what did you expect? You're never home. You're so wrapped up in your little business that you've forgotten how to be a real wife. At least these women know how to make a man feel appreciated. His words cut deep, but I forced myself to stay composed. Why not just ask for a divorce if you're so unhappy? I asked. Lose half of everything I've worked for? No thanks. Besides, it's convenient having someone manage the house while I focus on my actual career. And just like that, the truth landed with brutal clarity. He had never seen me as a partner, only as an accessory, a convenience. To him, the business I had built from nothing was nothing more than a hobby, unworthy of respect. There's more, I said, pulling out the bank statements I had set aside. You've been taking money from our joint account. Thousands of dollars that didn't go toward household expenses. He sneered. So what? My money paid for most of this house. My salary covers our lifestyle. You should be grateful I let you play entrepreneur instead of insisting you get a real job. Each word peeled back another layer, exposing the man behind the charming facade I had once fallen in love with. When he finally stormed out, muttering something about spending the night at Patrick's, though I knew exactly whose bed he would be in, I sat alone in our beautiful home and cried. But I didn't cry for the man who had just left. I cried for the 7 years I had wasted loving someone who had never truly seen me. The next week passed in a haze of grief and startling clarity. For the first time in years, I took time off work, forcing myself to pause, to process. My days oscillated between uncontrollable sobbing and making meticulous lists of next steps. Friends I had neglected while building my business rallied to my side. Kate flew in from Chicago and stayed for 3 days, helping me sort through my options. Over a bottle of wine, she finally said what I had never let myself admit. He's been gaslighting you for years, she told me gently. I saw how he dismissed your accomplishments, but every time I tried to bring it up, you brushed it off. Her words hurt, but they also steadied me. For the first time, I felt the fog beginning to lift. Other friends echoed Kate's words. They admitted they had seen warning signs, the dismissive comments, the arrogance, the subtle power plays, but had hesitated to intervene as I became increasingly distant and absorbed in work. A few even confessed they had long suspected James's infidelity, though they never had proof to show me. 10 days after discovering the affairs, I scheduled an appointment with Samantha Williams, a divorce attorney recommended by my financial advisor. I told no one, not even James. By then, he had returned home after 2 days away, acting as though nothing had happened, assuming I would swallow this betrayal just as I had endured his dismissals and his stranglehold on our finances. Samantha was direct, efficient, and razor-sharp. She laid out the divorce process in Massachusetts, outlining exactly what I could expect. When I revealed the full scope of my finances, the valuation of Digital Elevate, my investment properties, my stock portfolio, she let out a low whistle. "And your husband has no idea about any of this?" I shook my head. "He thinks Digital Elevate barely breaks even. He's never asked to see the books, and I file taxes separately as a business owner." Samantha gave a small smile. "Unusual. Usually I'm helping women uncover what their husbands have hidden. This might actually be refreshing." Together, we built a strategy. I would continue to appear financially dependent while quietly gathering proof of James's affairs and his financial misconduct. Samantha warned me not to confront him again until we were ready to strike. 3 weeks later, James was served. His reaction unfolded exactly as Samantha predicted: fury mixed with smug overconfidence. He stormed into the kitchen, divorce papers clenched in his hand. "You will regret this," he sneered. "I will take half of everything, including your precious little business. You'll be left with nothing. Good luck paying rent on what you make." I kept my voice calm, just as Samantha had coached. "I just want what is fair." "Fair?" he spat. "I'll show you fair. I paid for this lifestyle while you played businesswoman. You have no idea who you're dealing with." On that, he was right. He had no idea who he was dealing with either. Following Samantha's advice, I moved out of our townhouse into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a middle-class neighborhood. The rent was reasonable, the furnishings plain but comfortable. When James came by to pick up documents and saw the place, he smirked, mistaking it for proof of my weakness. "From a brownstone to this? Reality hitting hard already," he remarked, his contempt barely disguised. I shrugged lightly. "I need to be practical now." The truth was, I could have afforded a luxury condo downtown without blinking, but appearances mattered, and part of our strategy was letting him believe the illusion. I kept driving my 7-year-old Honda, wore my older clothes, and avoided any purchases that might betray my true financial position. Dividing our belongings turned into another battlefield. James demanded nearly everything of value: artwork, high-end furniture, even the kitchen appliances I had chosen and used. I let him have them. They were insignificant compared to what really mattered. In a detailed meeting with Samantha, I laid out my entire financial picture. Digital Elevate was now valued at roughly $4.2 million, based on current revenue and growth projections. My real estate portfolio, 4 properties in Boston and 1 in Cambridge, was worth over $3 million. Stocks and retirement accounts added another $1.8 million. Altogether, my net worth stood close to $9 million, not including the shared marital assets James was fighting over. Samantha looked up from the papers, arching an eyebrow. "And he believes you're worth what, exactly?" "Based on his comments, maybe a few $100,000 at most. He thinks I have little savings and almost no investments." Her smile widened. "Perfect." He knew about the one property we had purchased together, but not about the others. Samantha nodded as I explained, jotting down notes. "Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, not a community property state," she reminded me. "That means assets are divided fairly, but not necessarily equally. Assets acquired before marriage or through inheritance usually remain with the original owner. Your business was started after marriage, yes, but he contributed neither capital nor meaningful effort. In fact, we have clear evidence he actively dismissed and undermined it." With that foundation, we prepared for the first mediation meeting. We assembled documentation of James's affairs, records of the misappropriated funds he had siphoned from our joint account, and detailed proof that he had played no role in Digital Elevate's success. James, of course, came armed. He had hired Timothy Maxwell, a ruthless divorce attorney notorious for protecting wealthy men and ensuring their wives walked away with as little as possible. From the moment the mediation began, the tension was palpable. James walked in wearing a brand new designer suit and a flashy watch I had never seen before, another symbol of his need to project superiority. Maxwell wasted no time adopting an adversarial stance. "My client," he began smoothly, "is prepared to be generous despite Mrs. Anderson's infidelity to the marriage through her work obsession. He allowed her the freedom to pursue her hobby business instead of contributing more substantially to the household." The words hit like a slap. My nails dug into Samantha's sleeve under the table, grounding myself so I wouldn't explode. James's proposed settlement was everything we expected. Half ownership of Digital Elevate, on the grounds that his financial support had served as the seed investment. He demanded sole possession of our shared home, with no buyout to me, half of all bank accounts, and reduced alimony on the basis that I had business income. What he did not demand, because he had no idea they existed, were my investment properties, my stock portfolio, or my private accounts. Samantha and I had anticipated this blind spot from the start. When Maxwell finished, Samantha leaned forward, her tone calm but unyielding. "My client rejects this proposal entirely. We are prepared to offer an equitable division of jointly acquired assets only, with no claim on businesses or investments acquired through independent effort." The session ended without agreement, as we had expected. James left radiating smug confidence. As they walked out, I overheard him mutter to Maxwell, "She can't afford to drag this out. She'll settle once she realizes what good legal representation costs." Over the next 3 months, his tactics proved exactly that: delay, obstruct, exhaust. James buried us in requests for financial disclosures, many of them irrelevant, clearly intended to drive up my legal bills and wear me down. James contested everything. Who would pay the mortgage on the house? Which of us would keep up the car insurance? Every temporary arrangement turned into a battle. He canceled and rescheduled meetings repeatedly, each time forcing Samantha to prepare twice. His demands grew more absurd by the week. Alimony, despite his $200,000 annual income. A claim to my business contacts and client relationships. Even an argument that casual ideas he had tossed out over dinner had been the foundation of my strategy, giving him supposed intellectual property rights. His tactics were not confined to legal filings. James tried to intimidate me in countless ways. He called late at night, his voice swinging from threats to hollow pleas for reconciliation. Twice he stormed into my office without warning, making such a spectacle that I had to call building security to escort him out. He poisoned the air with lies, telling mutual friends that I was unraveling, that my business was failing, that I was hiding assets to cheat him of a fair settlement. The toll was undeniable. I lost 15 pounds. Anxiety shadowed me, making ordinary tasks feel monumental. I began therapy with Dr. C. Rachel Harrison, who helped me name what I had endured: emotional abuse. She taught me that his behavior was not my fault and gave me the tools to hold boundaries through the chaos. Support came from places I hadn't expected. My employees at Digital Elevate rose to the challenge, stepping into greater responsibility whenever I was pulled into legal meetings. My clients stayed loyal, dismissing James's attempts to discredit me, and my circle of friends clarified itself. Those who had been drawn only to James faded away, leaving the true ones who stood firmly by my side. 6 months of negotiations yielded nothing but legal bills and exhaustion. At the final mediation attempt, James was still intransigent, convinced I would cave before risking the cost and strain of trial. Timothy Maxwell delivered their final proposal with smug precision. My client's final offer is 50% of all marital assets, including the business, plus appropriate alimony to maintain the lifestyle to which Mrs. Anderson has become accustomed, thanks to his income. Samantha didn't even glance at me. We reject this offer and are prepared to proceed to court. James laughed out loud. You cannot afford that. Be reasonable, Tasha. Take the offer before it gets worse for you. I met his gaze steadily. I will see you in court, James. The weeks that followed were grueling. Samantha and I worked relentlessly, organizing every piece of documentation. The growth of Digital Elevate, proof that it had thrived despite, not because of, James. Records of his affairs, financial misconduct, evidence of the emotional abuse that defined our marriage. Most importantly, we prepared my comprehensive financial disclosure, knowing it would be the moment that shattered James's delusion. The night before trial, James sent one last message. Last chance to settle reasonably. Tomorrow will not go well for you. I didn't respond. For the first time in our relationship, I felt entirely certain of my worth, financially and personally. Tomorrow would be a reckoning, but not the one he imagined. I woke at 5:30 on the morning of our court date after a fitful night of sleep. Anxiety still pulsed through me, but beneath it was a strange calm. The kind of clarity that comes when you know the truth is finally about to be revealed. I chose a conservative navy blue suit, professional, understated, and deliberately unflashy. Minimal jewelry, subtle makeup. Samantha had been clear. Present myself as composed and reasonable, the steady counterpoint to James's inevitable display of vanity. When we arrived at the Suffolk County Courthouse, I spotted him instantly. James stood on the front steps in what was obviously a brand new designer suit, fussing with his reflection in his phone camera. A gleaming watch, yet another I had never seen before, flashed on his wrist. He laughed loudly with Maxwell, his attorney, the two of them looking more like men preparing for a victory lap than for the dissolution of a 7-year marriage. When James noticed me, he smirked and leaned in to whisper something to Maxwell, who chuckled along. I kept my face neutral as Samantha and I walked past. Remember, Samantha murmured as we entered the building. Let him be smug. Overconfidence works in our favor. Courtroom 4B was solemn and imposing, its dark wood paneling and the Great Seal of Massachusetts looming above the judge's bench. Samantha and I settled at the plaintiff's table, arranging our binders and documents in precise order. Across the aisle, James made a show of adjusting his tie and cufflinks, playing to an invisible audience. The room held only clerks, court officers, and a few scattered observers waiting for their cases, but James behaved as though he were headlining a performance. When Judge Karen Peterson entered, everyone rose. In her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and reading glasses perched on her nose, she radiated authority. Her reputation for fairness and no-nonsense efficiency was one of the reasons Samantha had been so confident. Anderson versus Anderson, dissolution of marriage and division of assets, the clerk announced. Judge Peterson glanced at the case file before speaking, her voice steady and sharp. I have reviewed the filings from both sides. Let me be clear. I have no patience for theatrics or attempts to obscure financial information. This court's purpose is to ensure an equitable division based on facts, not emotions. The proceedings began with opening statements. Maxwell went first, painting James as the noble provider who had graciously supported my entrepreneurial experiment, while I neglected our marriage in favor of a business that produced modest income at best. He argued that James deserved significant compensation, both for his supposed financial investment in my career and for the sacrifices he had made to maintain our lifestyle. Samantha's statement was brief but devastatingly precise. She detailed how I had built Digital Elevate through my own expertise and relentless effort, often in the face of James's belittlement and lack of support. She touched on his infidelity and his financial misconduct, but her focus remained on the central truth. My business was the result of my independent labor and, under Massachusetts law, not subject to equal division. Then, James was called to testify first. James presented himself as the picture of the wronged husband, claiming that both my success and my business itself were built on his sacrifices. "I gave her business advice almost daily," he said with practiced confidence. "I introduced her to key clients. I even allowed her to use our home as an office rent-free during the company's early days. I essentially funded her business by covering all of our living expenses while she reinvested any profits. Without my financial support, Digital Elevate would not exist." During cross-examination, Samantha dismantled his narrative piece by piece. She introduced email chains in which James openly dismissed my business as trivial. She presented testimony from my first major client, who confirmed they had discovered me through prior work with another company, not through any connection of James's. She even produced a recording from a dinner party, where James could be heard laughing as he referred to Digital Elevate as Tasha's cute little side project, while others discussed their careers. James maintained a calm exterior, but I could see the strain in the way he gripped the edge of the witness stand, his knuckles white. Still, he projected confidence, even flashing a smile at the judge now and then, as though they shared some unspoken understanding of how this case would end. When it was my turn to testify, I kept my voice steady, my words factual. I walked through the growth of Digital Elevate, my investment strategies, and the truth of our marriage. I spoke about James's increasing lack of support, how he belittled my achievements, and how I eventually stopped sharing my successes with him to avoid his constant negativity. "Your Honor, I never set out to hide assets," I explained. "I simply stopped discussing my business with someone who consistently undermined it. The separate accounts were necessary for proper business accounting, not concealment." Judge Peterson leaned forward, asking pointed questions about why I had not disclosed the full scope of my finances during early settlement discussions. Samantha answered smoothly. Full disclosure had been provided in every required legal filing. Informal settlement talks, she reminded the court, did not carry the same obligations. The pivotal moment came after lunch. Judge Peterson adjusted her glasses, scanning the financial disclosures before lifting her gaze toward James and his attorney. "According to these documents, Digital Elevate is currently valued at $4.2 million. Miss Anderson also owns real estate investments valued at just over $3 million, as well as investment and retirement accounts totaling $1.8 million. Mr. Anderson, were you aware of these assets?" The blood drained from James's face. He leaned toward Maxwell, whispering frantically. Maxwell, too, looked blindsided, flipping through papers as though the numbers might vanish if he just turned the pages quickly enough. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. James struggled to compose himself before finally answering, his voice strained. "No, Your Honor, I was not. My wife clearly concealed these assets during our marriage." Judge Peterson's tone was crisp as she flipped to another page. "That is not accurate. All business filings were properly registered with the state. The real estate purchases are a matter of public record," Judge Peterson said firmly. "There is no evidence of concealment from legal authorities, only that you did not take an interest in your wife's financial activities." James's composure cracked. His voice rose, raw and incredulous. "This is impossible. Her business was small, local. There's no way it could be worth millions. She must have falsified these valuations." Judge Peterson's frown deepened. "Mr. Anderson, you will speak only when addressed by the court. The valuation was conducted by an independent firm and is supported by tax filings and client contracts." Maxwell, scrambling to regain control, requested a recess to review the surprising new information. Judge Peterson denied it without hesitation. All financial disclosures were filed within the required time frame, she said. But James wouldn't let it go. She never told me, he snapped, ignoring Maxwell's attempt to silence him. I gave her the idea for the business. I introduced her to clients. Half of that company is rightfully mine. Samantha was ready. Calmly, she presented the original Digital Elevate business plan, dated 2 years before I had even met James. She followed with emails from my earliest clients confirming they had hired me based on my prior work, not through any of James's contacts. Finally, she produced the official registration of the company name, secured months before our first date. I watched as James's face cycled from disbelief to fury, and finally to a chalky pallor. His arrogance was dissolving in real time. He leaned toward Maxwell, whispering furiously, but Maxwell only shook his head. Then, against all advice, James lurched to his feet. "Your Honor, I need to clarify something about these valuations," he began, his voice unsteady. Judge Peterson's gaze was sharp. "Mr. Anderson, please sit down unless you are addressed by the court." "But this is important," he insisted. She must have been hiding income. We lived modestly compared to what these numbers suggest. I drive a BMW while she kept that old Honda. Our vacations were paid for by me. None of this makes sense. Judge Peterson raised a hand, her patience thinning. "We will take a 15-minute recess. Both parties are instructed to compose themselves before we continue." As the court officers guided everyone out, I caught sight of James stumbling toward the restroom, his face ashen, his swagger gone. He looked physically ill. When court resumed, Judge Peterson delivered her ruling in clear, deliberate tones. The division of assets, she explained, would be based on actual contributions to their acquisition, not an arbitrary 50-50 split. James would receive his share of our joint checking and savings accounts, half the equity in our shared home, and his personal property. He would retain his own retirement accounts and investments, just as I would retain mine. Most importantly, Digital Elevate remained entirely mine. Judge Peterson found no evidence that James had contributed meaningfully to its development or growth. The same applied to my investment properties and stock portfolio, all of which had been purchased with business profits. "This court finds no basis for alimony for either party," she continued. "Both parties have substantial independent income. The marriage lasted 7 years. Both are employed, and there are no children to consider. Each has the means to maintain their lifestyle without support from the other." James could not contain himself. He shot to his feet, shouting, "This is robbery! She built this business while we were married. I'm entitled to half." Judge Peterson's gavel struck sharply. "Mr. Anderson, one more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. The law does not entitle you to the fruits of your wife's labor merely because you were married when she performed it. Your own testimony revealed your dismissive attitude toward her business, undermining your claim of contribution." As the ruling concluded and we began gathering our things, James tried to lunge toward me, his face twisted with rage. A court officer stepped quickly between us while Samantha guided me firmly toward the exit. Over the officer's shoulder, I caught one last look at James, his once handsome face contorted, no longer charming but grotesque, warped by entitlement that had always lurked beneath the surface. "This is not over, Tasha," he bellowed after me. "You will regret this." Outside the courthouse, I inhaled deeply, the first unburdened breath I felt I had taken in years. The weight of secrecy and pretense was finally gone. Samantha squeezed my arm with quiet pride. "It went even better than we hoped," she said. Judge Peterson saw right through him. Waiting just beyond the steps were friends who had gathered to support me. Kate had flown in again, alongside Monica, my college roommate, and 2 colleagues from Digital Elevate who had become like family. They enveloped me in hugs. "You were magnificent in there," Kate whispered, so composed, while he fell apart. News of the settlement spread quickly through our circle. James had always been the one with the wide network of connections, but many of those ties proved fragile, held together by his position and charm rather than loyalty. Within days, messages began arriving from mutual acquaintances, offering support, and often sharing long-suppressed stories of James's arrogance and inappropriate behavior. The days that followed brought a flurry of messages from James himself, each more desperate than the last. At first, they were angry texts, full of accusations and threats of appeal. When I ignored them, his tone shifted. Remorseful emails claiming he had always loved me, that stress from work had driven him astray. And when those went unanswered, the voicemails came. His voice breaking, pleading to talk, insisting he had always believed in my potential. But for the first time in 7 years, I no longer needed his belief. I responded to none of his messages, following Samantha's firm advice: no contact except through attorneys. James's threats of appeal evaporated quickly after Maxwell apparently explained how futile they would be given Judge Peterson's thorough and precise ruling. 2 weeks later, word reached me through a former colleague that James had been placed on administrative leave from his firm. The stress of the divorce, combined with his bruised ego, had cracked his professional facade. He'd had an outburst during an important client meeting, behavior so inappropriate that his employer could no longer ignore it. Mutual acquaintances reported back with fragments of his shifting narratives. To some, James insisted I had hidden millions in offshore accounts. To others, he claimed the business valuation was wildly inflated. To a few, he softened his story, admitting to some mistakes, but dismissing them as harmless flirtations I had blown out of proportion. I didn't respond, didn't correct, didn't defend. I maintained my dignity in silence. Those who mattered already knew the truth, and those who believed James's ever-changing stories without question were not people I needed in my life. About a month after the divorce was finalized, I ran into James at a local coffee shop. He was a shadow of his former self, disheveled, the polish gone. He admitted he had been let go from his position, struggling to find comparable work now that his courtroom behavior had circulated through the industry. The luxury apartment he had rushed to rent after our separation was no longer affordable without his executive salary. For the first time, James seemed humbled. "I didn't know," he said quietly as we stood awkwardly near the cream and sugar station. "About your success. I mean, you never told me." I looked at him evenly. "You never asked, James. You were too busy telling me how cute my little business was." He had no answer. As I turned to leave, I added softly, "I hope you find what you're looking for. Everyone deserves a chance to rebuild." It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was an acknowledgement that bitterness would only weigh me down, while letting go set me free. Walking out of that coffee shop, I felt the final threads between us snap cleanly, at last. The year that followed became a journey of healing and rediscovery. With the burden of secrecy and pretense lifted, I could finally breathe. I slept through the night. I reconnected with parts of myself I had silenced during my marriage. Therapy became the cornerstone of my recovery. Dr. Harrison guided me through the tangled emotions I had carried for years. We unpacked the manipulation, the gaslighting, the erosion of self-worth. We confronted my guilt for hiding my success, my anger at James's betrayals, and my fear of ever trusting someone again. For the first time in a long time, I was not just surviving. I was rebuilding. "Your success threatened his sense of superiority," Dr. Harrison explained during one session. "Some people need to feel above others to feel secure. Your growing independence challenged the dynamic he wanted." Her words resonated. They gave shape to what I had felt, but couldn't quite name. I joined a support group for divorced professionals and found comfort in the shared stories around the circle. Again and again, I heard familiar refrains: partners who had felt threatened by success, independence, or ambition. Through their experiences, I gained perspective on my own and recognized patterns I was determined never to repeat. Journaling became another lifeline. Each evening, I poured my thoughts onto the page: anger, grief, fear, and hope. Over time, my entries transformed. What began as raw confusion slowly shifted into clarity, resilience, and strength. Writing gave me a mirror for my own growth, a tangible record of the person I was becoming. As I healed, my energy flowed naturally back into Digital Elevate. For the first time, I no longer had to downplay my accomplishments or hide my ambition. I pursued opportunities I had once hesitated to consider. We opened a second office in New York, expanding to national clients. I hired a skilled operations director, freeing me to focus on strategy and building deeper client relationships. With my business thriving openly, I stepped into a new role as a leader and a voice. I began speaking at industry conferences, offering insights on digital marketing and entrepreneurship. I accepted interview requests from business publications, no longer fearful that attention to my success might cause conflict at home. At one conference in Chicago, a professor approached me after my talk. She asked if I would guest lecture for her marketing classes. What started as a single invitation grew into a recurring opportunity. Standing in front of young entrepreneurs, sharing not just strategies but lessons born of experience, became an unexpected source of joy. The freedom to live authentically carried into my personal life as well. I left behind my modest post-separation apartment and purchased a beautiful brownstone in a neighborhood I had always admired. This time, every design choice was mine. No compromises, no silent negotiations. The space reflected me entirely. I also rediscovered passions I had let fade during my marriage. I joined a local photography club, capturing the city through new eyes. On weekends, I hiked the trails of New Hampshire's mountains, savoring the quiet strength that comes from standing on a summit with no one to answer to but yourself. For the first time in years, my life felt fully my own. Perhaps the most meaningful development was the mentorship program I founded for women entrepreneurs. Financial Foundations offered guidance on business strategy, investment, and wealth building, with an emphasis not just on financial success, but on financial autonomy. The program taught women how to protect and grow their assets regardless of their relationship status, ensuring that their independence could never be compromised. Through this work, I met dozens of brilliant, ambitious women brimming with innovative ideas and the determination to bring them to life. Many, like me, had faced discouragement or outright dismissal from partners or family members who never took their ambitions seriously. Helping them navigate both the practical challenges of business and the emotional barriers of self-doubt became some of the most fulfilling work I had ever done. One mentee, Angela Martinez, left a marriage where her husband had mocked her ideas and went on to launch a successful tech startup. After securing her first round of funding, she told me, "You showed me that success is the best response to doubt." Another participant, Shannon Lewis, used our investment strategies to build enough financial security to finally leave a controlling relationship. "I stayed because I thought I couldn't afford to leave," she confided. "Learning to build my own wealth was the most empowering decision I ever made." As the months passed, I cultivated new friendships rooted in authenticity rather than social obligation. My circle was smaller but infinitely more supportive. Kate remained my closest confidant, flying in from Chicago often and reminding me of my strength whenever doubt crept in. Thomas, my creative director, grew into a trusted friend outside of work, welcoming me into his circle of artists and entrepreneurs who embraced me without judgment or expectation. Dating again came slowly, deliberately. I wasn't in any rush. For the first time in my adult life, I reveled in my independence and the rediscovered sense of self I had fought so hard to reclaim. When I did begin to explore new relationships, I did so with clear boundaries and sharper awareness of red flags. I was no longer willing to shrink myself, no longer willing to dim my light to make someone else comfortable with my success. This time, I knew exactly who I was, and I wasn't afraid to shine. A year and a half after my divorce, I saw James again at an industry event. He had landed a new position, smaller firm, smaller title, smaller salary, though he carried himself with the same inflated charm. At his side was a much younger woman who looked visibly uncomfortable as he monopolized conversations with others. From across the room, I felt no anger, no attraction, only a quiet gratitude that I had freed myself from that world. Later that evening, he approached me at the bar. "You look well, Tasha," he said, his tone surprisingly sincere. "Your company is doing amazing things. I saw the feature in Business Monthly." "Thank you," I replied, my voice even. There was a pause. He shifted, searching for words. "I was wrong," he admitted at last. "About a lot of things. I should have supported your dreams instead of feeling threatened by them." I nodded, accepting without absolving. "I hope you're finding happiness, James." "Working on it," he said with a faint, rueful smile. "Some lessons take longer to learn than others." As we parted, I realized just how far I had come. The woman who once hid her success for peace, who shrank herself to avoid conflict, who mistook dismissal for love, that woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, unapologetically herself. The greatest wealth I carried away from my marriage wasn't financial, though that security gave me freedom. The true treasure was self-knowledge, confidence, and the ability to live without pretense. I learned that my worth is not defined by someone else's approval, that genuine success requires not only achievement, but authenticity, and that the right people will never fear your light, they will celebrate it. Today, looking toward the future, I feel nothing but gratitude for the joy, the pain, and the lessons that shaped me. Every experience, even the hardest ones, carved me into the woman I am now, and she is someone I am proud to be.